I think it's safe to say that change is on my agenda. Change for good. And I embrace that and I enjoy that change. I don't fear it. That's the bit that excites me, is the idea of being able to bring some change.
King Charles spent decades building a world that included Camilla and everyone close to her. But the moment he became king, the most powerful of those estates passed to William. And William had different ideas. One by one, the arrangements Charles had carefully built began to dissolve. So what exactly did William do that left Camilla's family unsettled? William takes the reins. The day Queen Elizabeth II passed away at Balmoral Castle in Scotland on the 8th of September 2022, the British royal family changed in ways that went far beyond the loss of a monarch. The line of succession had been in place for decades, but the speed with which titles, assets, and responsibilities transferred was striking even to those who had studied royal protocol closely. Within hours of the Queen's passing, Charles became King Charles III. His eldest son, William, became the Prince of Wales and the 25th Duke of Cornwall simultaneously. That transfer of title was not symbolic. It came with one of the most valuable private estates in the United Kingdom, and William understood immediately the scale of what had just landed in his hands. The Duchy of Cornwall had been in existence since 1337, when King Edward III created it specifically to give his son and heir a source of independence separate from the crown. It was built on the understanding that the eldest son of the reigning British monarch would always hold it. For nearly 7 centuries, that arrangement had held firm through wars, revolutions, and the transformation of Britain itself. Now, it passed to William at a moment when the country was still absorbing the grief of losing its beloved queen. The estate was valued at over £1 billion at the time of transfer, covering more than 135 acres spread across 20 counties in England and Wales. The land included working farms, ancient forests, rivers, stretches of coastline, commercial properties, holiday cottages, and even the operational lease of Dartmoor Prison. It was, by any measure, an extraordinary inheritance. King Charles had managed the duchy for over 50 years before becoming king, and he handed it over, knowing it was in strong financial shape. In the final full year of his management, the estate generated over £21 million in net surplus income. That income had funded Charles and Camilla's official and private lives for decades, supported their charitable commitments, and covered the considerable costs of running their household and staff. When William stepped into the role, that same income stream became entirely his. In his first full year as Duke of Cornwall, the duchy paid him £23.6 million, making it the primary financial foundation for him and his family. William approached the role with a clear sense that he was not simply maintaining what his father had built. He set up his working relationship with the duchy management team quickly and signaled from the start that he intended to run the estate according to his own priorities and methods. Where Charles had long communicated with estate staff primarily by telephone, William brought digital tools and a more structured management approach into the operation. It was a small but telling sign that a new generation had taken control. William also moved to apply the estate's resources toward issues he had made central to his public identity, particularly the challenge of homelessness, which he had been speaking about for years before inheriting the wealth to act on it in a meaningful way. The broader inheritance picture surrounding the estate transfer was also important to understand. Balmoral Castle in Scotland and Sandringham House in Norfolk, both privately owned properties that had belonged to Queen Elizabeth personally, did not become part of the Duchy of Cornwall. They passed directly to King Charles as part of the Queen's private estate. These two properties carried huge historical and personal significance for the family. Balmoral had been a private retreat for monarchs since the reign of Queen Victoria, and Sandringham had served as a family gathering place at Christmas for generations. Both remained in Charles's name, giving him his own private property base even after the duchy moved to William. For the moment, the two men each held their own significant piece of the royal estate picture. What the transfer quietly established was a financial and institutional independence for William that had not existed before. As the heir apparent dependent on his father, William had been given an allowance from the duchy while Charles managed it, but the decisions had always been Charles's to make. Now William was the owner, the manager, and the ultimate authority over how the estate operated and who it involved. Although he still owed his father politeness and respect, he was not required to seek his approval or discuss choices connected to the duchy. The estate Charles had spent many years shaping had now passed into William's control. Their relationship remained strong in many ways, yet it now had to adjust to this new reality where William carried the responsibility of guiding the duchy's future direction. The transition was orderly on paper, but beneath its surface it carried a weight that went beyond property and finance. The duchy had been the vehicle through which Charles had built much of his professional and personal world as heir. His charitable work, his staff relationships, his investments in sustainable farming and architecture, and his personal arrangements for those close to him had all been woven into how the duchy was managed over the decades. When the estate passed to William, none of those personal layers passed with it automatically. They remained only for as long as William chose to honor them, and William had already made clear, through the constant efficiency of his early management decisions, that he intended to run his estate on his own terms. The question of which parts of his father's world would survive that process was one that a number of people were beginning to ask. The Parker-Bowles connection. When Annabel Elliot first began working for the Duchy of Cornwall in 2005, the arrangement had nothing to do with competitive hiring or professional evaluation. She came in through a relationship of personal trust, brought into the estate's operations by King Charles in the same year he married her sister Camilla. The timing was not coincidental. Charles had spent years working to build Camilla into the fabric of royal life, and extending opportunities to those closest to her was part of that effort. Annabel was given the role of chief interior designer across the duchy's residential and commercial properties, a position with a wide remit and consistent work that would last, as it turned out, for nearly 2 decades. She was well connected in the world of British interior design, and her work was by most accounts well received by those who used the properties she renovated and decorated. Her portfolio across the estate grew substantially over the years. She worked on the holiday cottages in Cornwall, Wales, and the Isles of Scilly that the duchy rented to private guests. She took on the duchy's office spaces and its nursery in Lostwithiel. She oversaw the refurbishment of a 20-bedroom pub at Poundbury, the architectural development project in Dorset that Charles had championed since the early 1990s as a model of traditional town planning. She also managed the conversion of 2 cottages and a lodge for visitors at Dumfries House in Ayrshire, the Scottish property that Charles had helped rescue from sale in 2007. Each project added to her record with the estate and to the fees recorded in the duchy's annual accounts. Those fees accumulated into a substantial sum across the years of her engagement. The duchy's accounts recorded her payments with standard language describing the transactions as being made at arm's length and in the ordinary course of business. That description was technically correct in the sense that the amounts paid were commercially defensible and tied to actual work carried out. But the nature of her original appointment had never been commercially neutral, and everyone close to the arrangement understood that. She had not arrived through a tender process or after being selected from a field of candidates. She had arrived because her sister had married the man who owned the estate, and that connection had been the foundation of everything that followed. For as long as Charles remained Duke of Cornwall, the arrangement held without question. The moment that changed, the foundation beneath it became uncertain if it would hold. The 2024 Duchy of Cornwall Annual Report confirmed what had already been signaled the year before. No payment was recorded to Annabel Elliot for the period covered by the accounts. The prior annual report had already shown nothing owed or paid to her, meaning that by the time the 2024 document was published, Annabel had gone at least 2 full years without duchy income. The accounts offered no explanation, no reference to the end of a contract, and no acknowledgement that a long-standing arrangement had been closed. The entry simply did not appear. There was no formal statement from the duchy, no communication released through royal channels, and as far as those with knowledge of the situation were able to determine, no prior conversation with Charles or Camilla before the decision was implemented. Sources who spoke about the matter framed the end of Annabel's involvement in careful words. The explanation offered was that the interior work across the estate had reached a natural point of completion, and that the knowledge and skills she had brought to the operation had been absorbed by those already working within the duchy's team. It was described as the conclusion of a finished program of work rather than a removal, but the circumstances told a more complicated story. No formal review of her role had been announced. No transitional arrangement had been put in place. No public acknowledgement had been made of a contribution that had stretched across nearly 20 years. The The appointment had been created through a personal relationship, and it ended in a manner that was similarly quiet, except that the situation this time was not warm. What followed was an effort by Charles and Camilla to keep Annabelle connected to the royal world through other means. She was brought in to work on improvements at Balmoral, including work ahead of a new visitor center opening, and the palace indicated that she would be considered for appropriate opportunities going forward. Those efforts reflected genuine care on Charles and Camilla's part for someone close to them who had lost a significant and long-established source of income and professional status. However, the development also drew a clear line around what Charles could and could not do. He could offer Annabelle work on projects within his own control. He could not restore what William had decided to end. The duchy had been his life's work, and it was no longer his. What had been built within it was now subject entirely to the judgment of a new owner who had not been present when those arrangements were first made and who did not feel bound by them. The deeper chill. William versus the Parker Bowles family. The removal of Annabelle Elliot from the duchy's payroll was notable not because it was unexpected, but because it confirmed in concrete financial terms something that had been visible for years in the way William conducted himself around Camilla's family. The distance had been there long before William became Duke of Cornwall. It had roots in events that went back to his childhood, and it had never been fully resolved through the passage of time or through the formal ceremonies that brought two families together under one royal roof. The Parker Bowles family had been brought into royal life through Camilla's relationship with Charles, and William had always been aware of exactly how that had happened and what it had cost. Before Charles married Camilla in April 2025, both William and Harry had privately asked their father to reconsider, but the request was refused. Charles had waited for decades to marry the woman he had always loved, and he was not going to be persuaded otherwise, even by his sons. At the wedding ceremony at Windsor Guildhall, the two princes stood with the rest of the family and played their roles with composure, but the feelings that had made them ask their father to stop had not disappeared simply because the wedding went ahead. William carried with him a deep and long-standing grief over what had happened to his mother, Princess Diana, and Camilla had been at the center of that story for his entire life. The formal occasion did not erase that. It simply gave it a new and more complicated context to exist within. Laura, Camilla's daughter, had found herself on the other side of that grief in a way that led to real conflict. She had watched her own mother suffer through years of public hostility, tabloid cruelty, and harassment at the hands of photographers. She understood her mother's pain from the inside, and she did not accept the framing that placed Camilla as the sole cause of the breakdown of Charles and Diana's marriage. That difference in understanding led to arguments with William that were sharp enough to leave a lasting impression on both of them. The two never arrived at the kind of settled peace that might have allowed them to build something functional as step-siblings. They existed in the same extended family, appeared at the same occasions, and maintained a surface civility, but the closeness was not there, and neither side pretended otherwise. Tom Parker Bowles had a different kind of connection to the royal world, and his attitude toward it came more from what he had seen than from what anyone explained to him. Having Camilla as his mother meant he witnessed firsthand how the monarchy, along with people around it, could turn against someone. From a young age, he watched how quickly life could become complicated when the royal system decided to push back. He had spent his childhood and early adult years being followed by photographers, having his social life scrutinized, and learning the cost of proximity to the crown without the protections that came with actually belonging to it. He had responded to that experience by building a life as far from the formal royal world as he reasonably could. His career as a food writer and author was his own, earned entirely on his own terms, and he was intentional about keeping his professional identity separate from his family connection to the palace. Tom had spoken publicly about the choice he had made to stay outside the orbit that William and Harry occupied. He had made clear that he did not consider himself part of the royal family in any meaningful sense beyond his mother's marriage, and that he had understood from an early age that the world his stepbrothers lived in was not his to enter. William, for his part, had never given Tom reason to feel otherwise. Reports over the years described William as being uncomfortable around Tom, put off by aspects of the lifestyle Tom had lived in his younger years, and by a broader sense that they simply had very little in common. There was no deep enmity, no dramatic confrontation, but there was a consistent and settled distance that both men maintained without needing to discuss it. That background gave the decision concerning the Duchy of Cornwall a deeper meaning than a simple financial record. William did not make a cruel or aggressive move. He only chose not to keep up a practice his father had begun, within a domain that now belonged entirely to him. Yet the message behind the decision was clear. Anyone familiar with the past could easily understand what the move suggested about the change in direction. The Parker Bowles family had been woven into royal life through Charles's choices and Charles's resources. William had made none of those choices, and he had shown through the duchy that he did not feel obligated to maintain them. The chill that had always been present between William and Camilla's family had now found a formal and financial expression, and it left no room for uncertainty about where William intended to draw the line around his own estate and his own world. A consequential boundary. When the details of the Duchy of Cornwall annual report became clear and the removal of Annabel Elliott's payments was confirmed, King Charles found himself in one of the more delicate positions of his reign so far. The decision had been entirely within William's authority to make. No one who understood how the duchy worked could argue otherwise. The estate had transferred to William the moment Charles became king, and with it had transferred all rights to manage it, to direct its staff, and to decide who was and who was not involved in its operations. Charles had no formal standing to challenge what William had done, and attempting to do so informally would have created a conflict between the two men that neither of them wanted to have in the open. The personal dimension of the situation was harder to set aside than the legal one. Camilla had watched her sister lose an income that had been part of her professional life for nearly 20 years in a role created specifically as part of the world Charles had built for his wife. The arrangement at the duchy had been one element of a much larger effort that Charles had made over many years to bring Camilla's family into the warmth of royal life. That effort had cost him something. He had spent years persuading the institution, the public, and eventually his own sons to accept Camilla as a legitimate and valued presence in the monarchy. He had worked carefully and persistently to build a place for her, and by extension, for those she loved. The fact that his own son had undone one part of that without prior discussion landed with a blow that Charles could feel even if he could not say so directly. His response was characteristically measured. He and Camilla moved to maintain Annabel's connection to royal projects through other channels, bringing her in to oversee renovation work at Balmoral and signaling through the palace that she would remain someone considered for appropriate future work. The effort was genuine, and it achieved something real in practical terms. For one, Annabel retained a visible connection to the royal world, and her professional reputation was not left exposed by the loss of the duchy contract alone. But the effort also underlined exactly where the limits of Charles's influence now ran. He could extend his own resources and his own goodwill. He could not reach into the estate that belonged to his son and restore what had been removed. The boundary between what Charles owned and what William owned was now a real and consequential line, not simply a formal one. What made the situation particularly difficult was the absence of any prior conversation. The duchy's accounts communicated the decision without any of the personal preparation that Charles might have appreciated. He was the king, and he was also William's father. He had spent 50 years of his life building and managing the very estate that William now controlled. And yet, the decision about Annabel had been made and implemented without any apparent attempt to discuss it with him. Even Camilla had no idea before the accounts made it visible to the world. Whether that silence reflected a deliberate choice on William's part, or simply the exercise of an authority he saw no reason to explain, was not something that was clarified publicly. What was clear was that Charles had learned about the consequences of his son's decision at approximately the same time as everyone else. Those close to the family described the atmosphere between the households as tense rather than broken. Charles and William maintained their public relationship with the appearance of unity and cooperation, continuing to carry out joint engagements and to communicate through official and personal channels. The broader project of managing the monarchy through a period of significant change required both of them to function together, and neither had any interest in allowing a property dispute to become a public fracture. But the episode had revealed something about the internal balance of power within the family that could not be unlearned. The transfer of the duchy had not simply moved an asset from one generation to the next. It had shifted the practical authority over a significant slice of royal life away from Charles and toward William, and that shift had now produced its first visible consequence in a way that touched Camilla directly. For Charles, who had spent so much energy building a stable and accepted place for his wife within the institution, that was not a comfortable thing to absorb. How this shift affects the future. The decisions William made in the first 2 years of his ownership of the Duchy of Cornwall were significant not only for what they changed immediately, but for what they revealed about the direction of travel as the royal family moved through a period of generational transition. The duchy was the first major estate to pass to William, but it was not the last he would hold. Balmoral Castle in Scotland and Sandringham House in Norfolk, both privately owned by King Charles following their transfer from Queen Elizabeth's personal estate, would certainly pass to William when Charles passes away. Those two properties occupied a place in the emotional and institutional life of the British royal family that went far beyond their financial value. And the question of what William would do with them, and with the informal arrangements built within them, was one that those close to Camilla had begun to consider more carefully. Balmoral had been part of the royal family's private life since 1852, when Prince Albert purchased it for Queen Victoria after she fell in love with the Scottish Highlands during an earlier visit. The estate covered more than 53,000 acres of highland land and had passed from monarch to monarch ever since, carrying with it a tradition of privacy, retreat, and informal family life that no other royal property quite replicated. Queen Elizabeth had spent the final weeks of every summer there, and it was at Balmoral that she passed away in September 2022. Charles received it as part of her private estate alongside Sandringham, the Norfolk property that had served for generations, as the setting for the royal family's Christmas gathering and private breaks throughout the year. Both estates were deeply personal, deeply layered with family history, and deeply tied to the way the monarchy understood itself, away from the formal demands of public life. Neither Balmoral nor Sandringham generated the kind of commercial income that the Duchy of Cornwall produced, but both carried their own operational costs and their own networks of staff, tenants, and long-standing relationships. Over the decades of his marriage to Camilla, Charles had made decisions about those properties that reflected his personal priorities and his commitment to including Camilla's world within his own. The access and involvement that Camilla's family had enjoyed extended beyond the duchy to the broader atmosphere of royal estate life. And those experiences had become part of how the Parker Bowles family understood their own place in the extended royal picture. Without formal titles or institutional roles, their connection to royal spaces depended entirely on the personal generosity of whoever held the property. When Charles was eventually no longer in a position to make the decisions, the informal world that had formed around his marriage to Camilla would need to find its footing in a landscape defined by William's choices, not his. What William had demonstrated through his handling of the duchy was that he did not feel bound to maintain arrangements he had not personally created. The removal of Annabel Elliott's contract was one clear example of that principle in action. But the principle itself was broader than any single decision. William had taken ownership of the duchy and had begun running it according to his own sense of what was appropriate, who should be involved, and what priorities the estate should serve. He had done so without apology, without lengthy consultation, and without allowing the feelings of those affected to override his judgment about what the estate required. That pattern of behavior carried forward in time in a way that was difficult for those close to Camilla to ignore. Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lopez held no royal titles and no formal claims to any royal property. Their connection to royal estates had always been informal, extended to them through their mother's marriage and through Charles's personal decisions about how to use what he controlled. Those decisions had been generous, and the life they had been allowed to touch at the edges of had been shaped by that generosity. But it had never been theirs by right, and it had never come with any guarantee of continuity beyond the lifetime of the arrangement that had created it. The estate shift was therefore not simply a legal and financial event. It was the beginning of a longer process through which the world Charles had built around himself and his wife would be measured against William's own sense of what the next chapter of the monarchy should look like. William had been preparing for kingship his entire adult life, and the way he approached his estate responsibilities suggested a man who intended to lead the institution on his own terms. The Parker Bowles family had no place in that vision that William himself had placed there, and the duchy had made that visible, in terms that required no interpretation. The unsettled feeling that surrounded Camilla's family as they watched these developments was not based on a misreading of the situation. It was based on a clear and accurate understanding of what William's ownership of these estates would mean when the next transfer of power eventually came.